Welcome to the Cryptozoology Show with your host, the Cryptozoologist. I apologize. I've been trying many programs to make this expedient and these sorts of things, and unfortunately, for some reason, there's always this little bit of blurriness for about 2 or 3 seconds, 5 seconds, and then it'll clear up again. So I can't sort of, no matter what. I've tried many sort of things, and it just some kind of compression problem that the program has. It's nothing to, and the same thing is, so what I started doing now is trying to look over to make sure that it did save the correct wordage here. I hope this time it's getting it right or whatever, but this one seems to be the best visible, but it does blur it for a few seconds. So it works better than some of the other ones I've used, but it does have these sort of little bits of problems with it. So I messed with it and tried a higher DP sort of setting on it this time, and to smooth it as best as possible. Like, and they have these tweaks that you can do. So I'm gonna try that sort of thing, and hopefully this one will be a bit clearer and better ones for the future. And I put a contact direct email. A lot of people don't like going to the site or stuff if they have a story or whatever. So I just got a direct email there you can contact or whatever, and that sort of thing. So this episode, we got some really interesting ones here. We got a giant unknown otter, and beavers from Canada, and the otters are from South America, unknown giant otter. Littlefoot type of odd Sasquatch that's quite interesting. He's like a little troll. Mystery ghost fish of Sudbury, a giant unknown a monitor lizard in a lake, and giant snakes unknown in North America and the world, and a giant unknown bear or sloth, and some other odds and ends and things like that. So we'll be covering that. So if you saw my last episode there, if anybody, if you once you see the email and stuff, if you please look at the duck nest monster and tell me what this thing is, because seriously, I've never seen anything like it. Like, right, the closest thing I ever saw to something like that was a fairly larger duck that somebody had as a pet that was white, right? That was bigger than the normal sort of kinds that you would see. I don't know what this, like, it was some kind of farm like bred duck, right, of some sort. But this guy is different. He was really weird. His feet was Bigfoot. He should have been called, whatever, like the duck foot or something. Because seriously, his feet was a gigantic orange, blackish, weird color. Like there was little strains of black mixed in it, and it was 5 times the size, the width of the geese walking around there at the same time. So he was just as big as any of the sort of geese, but way actually fatter. None of the geese was even 3/4 the width of this dude that was walking around there. And his neck was much, much more thicker than any of the geese by massively far. Like you're talking double and a half times the width easily. And the feet, the same thing, at least 4 to 5 times the size of any geese of his exact same sort of height, right? So whatever this thing was, he had a black sort of a darker beak, from what I can remember anyway. So look at it, it was weird looking, his beak, and he had a little dot on his tail, and I think there was something on the other side that I saw, some little black patch possibly. So whatever this guy was, I have no idea. But I mean, he flew perfectly fine. He came from out of outer space. He just landed right in front of me, and he went quack quack and said hello to me and started walking around. It was the weirdest thing. Like this, what I'm saying. Even funnier is in the exact same location I have, and I'm still trying to look for it here. A pine marten was standing 3 feet in front of me. He came from seemingly outer space. Like how the hell could anything hide in this park when you got 5,000 Truglovianites there that people are coming in from other countries every 5 seconds, and they love these parks. and they actually sit all around with the goose poop and everything and have their picnics and don't even seem to care about this. I'm astonished by this. Like, I mean, when I'm walking, going past this stuff, I'm walking every second, trying to maneuver away from the 3,000 tons of goose shit and duck shit. Mostly, luckily, the ducks poop in the water. So, but typically, like, I mean, the goose poop is unbelievable. There's enough geese there to feed the entire, armies that are going on there for quite some time to come. But I mean, everybody, including myself, loves them. So nobody's going to bother them or anything. But they just everywhere. They're all over the place, running on the streets and all over the place because they've gotten used to people feeding them and all this garbage that they leave all over the grounds. Like I said, and my documentary cover all kinds of these problems, right, and these sorts of things. But I mean, this guy was extremely interesting. So I don't really know what it was, but I would really like to know, like if somebody has because I mean the size of them was astonishing. I mean, astonishing. You're talking bare minimum 5 to maybe even a little bit more times the weight of a normal sized duck. I mean, this is his legs was like 3 to 4 times the width of a typical sort of goose of the same sort of height. I mean, the whole thing was about him was astonishing, but his feet was blowing my mind. Seriously, they were like probably a foot plus across, like if spread out like this. This is his feet. So what kind of weird sort of guy was he, right? Like maybe somebody knows. Maybe he's some kind of farm like duck that is bred for something or whatever that escaped. I have no idea, but whatever he was, I've never seen one like him. So to me, he's mysterious. Maybe to some ornithologist they could tell me, but I would just like to know because I just find it weird that this guy flies from outer space. In the exact same spot, almost a pine marten comes from out of outer space. Like I mean, this place is like these sort of you know what I mean, the triangle of bizarreness around there. This same area has had everything from not far off from the 90-foot mahogany sea serpents, 4-foot sewer rats, muskies that are eating people's dogs, and all kinds of crazy things that have appeared in this sort of water system around there. And so, what is it? Some kind of a natural attraction to the bizarre and the unusual sort of thing, but a lot of strange sort of things have went on there, giant eel sightings and all kinds of other stuff, plus not to mention the 3,000 tons of different sorts of unknown pieces of garbage, unknown to science, maybe that has mutated in there, right? A sort of thing like this. So, but anyways, very interesting sort of whatever it was. So if somebody happens to know that's an expert on birds, if you could tell me what the hell this thing was, I would just like to know. Like, I mean, it would be fascinating to me. So, anyways, we'll continue on here and thanks for whatever any new subscribers. It's always appreciated. Be nice to finally, eventually. I'd imagine, like I said, fishing shows are different. They're actually filmed live, sort of thing. These fish I tortured on just weekends in the highest amount of, like, literally sometimes hundreds of boats on a body of water loaded full of garbage, 10,000 people going over your back and forth, joggers and 10 zillion people going past you, and all this sort of garbage and the weeds churned up from boats and canoes and all kinds of stuff going through it, where it terrorizes the fish. It's much more easier fishing on a weekday sort of thing, right? But I purposely did this, I went to a dollar store and collected the most garbage lures to prove to people that it has nothing to do with magic lures or baits. It's how you present them and where you present them and these sorts of things that is much more crucial than the so-called magic bait. That, like, I mean, this is fine for the Van Dams and all the gang out there where they have sponsors and they got to, promote their products, right? But I'm a real sort of like person here where where I went for massive over 4+ decades of professional sort of a tournament sort of angling sort of, and actually longer if you, but I mean actually just even professional, more pro like sort of stuff going, right, and these sorts of things. And way before that of other just normal big fish like sort of things. And so and I did this with like zero sponsors and never even looked for sponsors, didn't care about them, whatever. The only thing that was interest to me is to go to the next tournament and take on and see how big a fish I could reel in, right? That was it. I wasn't doing it for these kinds of things like a lot of these people, they rely on it as their sort of main sort of living like sort of thing. And so I just show you that monsters exist in all kinds of bodies of water. People need to stop polluting them, or they're not going to be there soon. And that there's and I'm going to show you all kinds of unusual techniques you've never heard of. I cover all kinds of species from giant carp to sort of catfish and muskies and walleyes and pike and all kinds of other sorts of species mixed in, largemouth, smallmouth, crappies, things like that, right? And I cover perch and different and odd techniques for them and all kinds of things. And because they were sort of film live, I put in tips and did you know how, did you know, like sort of, fun trivial like sort of questions, who was the first guy to do this or that, or all kinds of things. So I have another channel there being set up. I'm getting these films sort of put together and things like that. And then I'll be doing another season of it, but this time on more of the river systems, and I'm going to be chasing a lot with fly fishing equipment more and hunting all kinds of giant fish from muskies to all kinds of stuff, right? So, if you want to learn from a guy over, like I said, heading towards 6 decades of sort of fishing around the clock, then you'll certainly garner some tips. So it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a professional angler or whatever you're doing, you for sure will likely see some things you've never ran across before. So you can stay tuned for that sorts of things. But besides that, we'll continue on, and we got some really interesting, fascinating ones this time. Giant otters and beavers. Let us look at a few possible surviving relics. A giant unknown black otter of South America. This species has been witnessed by several zoological people in more recent times and said to be different than the giant South American otter. Said to be a bit smaller than a giant South American otters in typical and different in habits. Zoologist Mark van Roosmalen and another biologist separately recently described the species. It's said to live in rivers and lakes in the interior of the Amazonian rainforest. Yeah, so he's sort of a blackish with a little bit of a sort of weird tinge to it and things like that. I noticed even myself when I was up and I saw several sort of titanic otters in this one creek. It's in Quebec. And one of them went by my fly rod that I had, and there was no way this dude was under 8.5 feet long. There, no possible way. So I mean, because he almost covered the whole sort of thing of it, and some of his tail was under the water. So I might be being a bit on the conservative, but he went right near the tip of this, big fly rod, right? So I mean, there is some even in the Canadian market. There has been some reported in the past that rival the same size as these, South American otters. And as far as I know, like I mean, I'm not a world's class expert on otters. I don't know what exactly. I just presume it was a river otter, right? But I mean, it could be some other sort of thing, right? I have no idea, but there is some very big ones in our region that has been seen before. We had one in the Rideau Canal that was around 7 feet nearly, and he was actually stuck down inside this sort of thing. And I actually, it's too bad at the time we didn't have cameras with this stuff like this, but this poor guy, he was stuck on these sort of shallow gravel bars, and he would sit around in there and stuff like that, seemingly looking for a fish fish or whatever he was doing. He was looking around in the water, and then he started swimming up, and they started filling it. So I presume he escaped somehow. But anyways, so even right in a downtown sort of area, we've had these sort of things. But this is interesting, and it's very likely, it's very believable, this sort of thing like that. And apparently, this otter's a little bit smaller, sort of thing, but he's similar sort of size. But they say his habits are a little bit different. So yeah, another interesting sort of a cryptid out there that very likely is probably real, sort of thing like that. And here next, the giant sloth, Satoshan, Yukon Northwest Territories. And so let's look at a few possible surviving relics here. A giant unknown bearded sloth in the Yukon Northwest Territories said to hunt beaver lodges and to rip them open with giant claws. He looks similar to a sloth to bear. Issue is that sloths were thought to be vegetarians, of course, and sightings by natives are still persisting. A recent sighting was reported by the Cryptozoology Club. A few natives saw a giant bear-like creature 9 feet tall come out at them on a lake called Taduchan. An interesting account I got back in the 1970s that I had no idea of this sort of other sighting, so I didn't know what it was, just one I had collected, of a giant bear that was seen about 10 feet tall by this native guy on the Yukon River in his canoe. He said it was weird-looking giant bear that was seemingly following him along the shore, and it stood up and growled at him. He bolted off and it vanished back into the bush. He said it had an odd face that was very rounded, and it had giant claws on it. So maybe this is the same animal that sort of be seen. But here's where he saw it somewhere on the sort of Yukon River there down, right? And then this Lake Toshin here is sort of up in this area, right? So I mean, it's very interesting. But there's been numerous accounts and several different kinds of animals where they're all saying it's either a giant beaver-like monster, a bear-like monster, or slothish looking, right? Sort of in between these sorts of ranges. And they all call them different names, but all through this Yukon, Alaska, sort of in a bit of ranges outside of this, but basically in these sorts of areas. So fascinating. Wouldn't that be something that's interesting that sort of could still be in existence there? I would love something like that. That would be extremely cool. So whatever he may sort of possibly be is a very, very interesting sort of cryptid, you must admit. He would have, like, I mean, it's hard to believe some of these things, right? But I mean, these places are extremely remote, and yeah, almost no people go in them, and not much roads or all this kinds of things. It's feasible that the some of these areas have not been touched much by humans, except natives and stuff, and natives don't really have the care of the scientific like thing to describe the creature, whatever. They just have a name for them locally, and they either leave them alone or whatever it is, right? Like revere them or find them threatening or whatever the reason, and they sort of yeah, just leave it at that sort of thing, right? They tend to avoid any of these sorts of things typically, right? So, but very interesting. Anyways, a cryptid out there that's and I have some other reports up there of giant bear-like creatures that may actually be this thing, because all of them are strange looking. They said they didn't look like regular brown or black bears or any of this, and much bigger, and a lot of them had huge claws on them and things. So yeah, there's other sightings that I have over the ages and things like that. So I don't know, like, yeah, where whatever this sort of a thing, but this is the name of it, they're calling it. But I mean, I have no idea how old this is. Like the story I collected was in the 70s, for crying out loud. So they're claiming this is some kind of new phenomena, but like I said, I have stories that kind of match this, but I had no name for them. The guy didn't have any sort of name for it or whatever. He just thought it was some kind of huge, weird looking bear, right? Sort of thing. So it just an interesting sideline sort of thing to it, that possibly it's the same sort of things that they were saying. Here, giant beaver of Alaska, Yukon Northwest Territories, also northern Quebec, Arctic, northern Ontario, USA, even in a few locations. So let us look at a few more possible surviving relics here of a giant beaver. For centuries, a giant beaver making Titanic-sized beaver huts has been rarely seen in numerous far-off lakes and rivers, usually in the far north sort of thing. And ancient accounts say natives used to kill this giant beaver. He was said to be at least 8 to 12 feet long, brown to black in color. Several Northwest Territories to Alaskan lakes and rivers, especially, have these rare sightings. Also, from more northern Quebec and Ontario, along with, again, a few areas in the USA. One interesting account of a kayaker going along the Natla River in 1985 saw what looked like a giant beaver swim past his kayak, then made a big giant splash and vanished. It was black in color and possibly about 12 feet long, was at least 3 feet or so bigger than his kayak. That's what he said. He couldn't remember how big the kayak he was in, but it was like probably an 8 to 10 foot kayak, is yeah, somewhere in that sort of range. So that would be probably pretty close, sort of thing. Many more sightings I cover in the book. Interestingly, the natives say that these giant beavers made corkscrews in the ground, and this has actually been found. So I find this sort of fascinating, that how could they know that it was a giant beaver that made them, right? How could they know that, like, if they didn't actually see these guys, right? Like, how would they sort of know this? And there's even stories from 1800s of them finding these sort of giant dams, and even up in the 20th century, a few of them have been reported of this sort of thing. But they're quite rare. They're usually in really remote sort of locations, and these giant beavers would sort of, but it was weird, is a lot of early accounts, they seemed to be like vicious. So if you sort of tried to sort of attack or come near this thing, he would try and attack you of some sort, right, and try and kill you. So that they blame them on actual deaths and things, right? So fascinating sort of thing. But I have quite a few in the book that I had collected from different sort of native like tribes around in this sort of region, and a trapper fellow that I had met when I was a younger kid, that I would always ask him to, when he was out in these places, to collect any sort of stories for me, and he collected a few of these sorts of sorts. So very interesting anyway. So yeah, it's one of those things. I fully, there was a species that was known, that was around thousands of years ago, sort of thing, right? That would 100% match this sort of thing. I also find it suspicious how natives that supposedly couldn't have seen this creature would know how they make these weird sort of corkscrew tunnels and stuff and all this. I mean, that's again, right? So, I mean, scientists are wrong all the time. Like I said, I've shown many times, from fish species, things that they say, to all kinds of different things. So, yeah, like I said, I highly respect scientists. I know many, and even work with some, and these sorts of things like that. However, because I know that a lot of it is based on theoretical sorts of things, right? It isn't actually written in stone. Yeah, you know what I mean? You can say the creature's under 20 million years old, but you really can't prove that, right? So I'm just saying there is a lot of things that they put out that is not really like provable, right? You can say this all you want, but I mean, it doesn't really prove it, right? Sort of thing like that. So all I'm saying is that there is actual native sort of early cave-like drawings and all kinds of things showing these giant beavers, right? And these sorts of things, and their mentions, and that some of them are still claiming they're seeing them. Well, then you have to sort of keep these things in mind, right? And that again, fossilized records, according, if you were going to go by these sorts of things, according to a sort of gorillas would have died out like massive eons ago, right? And there's only a handful less, like less than a couple handful of fossil pieces of gorillas known worldwide ever. So unless that they had a gorilla that was shoved up their rectum by Paul de Choiseul, right? Okay, they would still be disagreeing that these creatures exist, right? So this what I'm saying is the same thing as here with Sasquatch and all these other things. Just because you find something and you believe it's 100 million years old or whatever, that does not mean that 30 feet away that some other cave could have still had some living on ones. This has been proven time and time and time again. Multi-species that you claim died out millions of years ago is now floating around, from mammal-like ones, from the Laotian rock rats to all kinds of things. So the thing is that no matter what, it shows that literally hundreds and hundreds of times now we have living like relics from ancient sort of times that supposedly was from ancient times. Like I said, I don't believe these things, but nevertheless, we'll go by the scientific way that they were millions of years old, right? The thing is that they don't find any fossils since then, yet there's still creatures that are alive. So it proves 100% that this could occur multi times over with any other sort of species, from Bigfoot, wild man, to the Loch Ness monster. It wouldn't matter what it is. All of them would the same sort of thing is feasible. Sort of a thing like that. So just keep those things in mind, sort of thing like that. But it's interesting. It's just another one out there. But I cover a lot more of them in the sort of books there and accounts and different things like that. So next year we'll talk about the Kalinaro, the little people of Madagascar. These little Bigfoot guys have been mentioned in explorers' journals to natives for centuries. This interesting cryptid monkey man was first mentioned in the 1800s by early travelers. He's said to be a shorter, furry, upright walking ape with evil little eyes and fangs with a stocky, muscular build. Often he's said to have long claws. Some claim even shorter, with that he's even shorter than that, with some sightings being only about 3 feet tall or less. One funny account mentioned a couple were making love by some campfire as the creature watched them and glaring sort of at them in the 80s, right? So another one of these sort of, poor, lonely little Bigfoot people there, and they're, wanting some, maybe to get a mate of some sort, right, sort of idea. So very interesting. Yeah, the sightings are rare. Many think they could be a giant extinct lemur, which there is other sort of tales of this sort of huge lemur-like sort of one, and a few other ones where they're stockier, bigger, and sort of like giant, and the thing leaps like 15, 20, 25 feet, like these giant leaps, right? But a lot of them have tails on them. These guys, seemingly, from what I could see, none of the ones, at least that I ran across, mention any sort of a tail on them. So I suspect they're more like one of our little miniature Bigfoot, like sort of little fellows, right? Some kind of wild humans or some kind of unknown ape species of some sort. And considering that the forest is untouched for centuries and riddled with mass caves, these little hairy men may exist, along with many other cryptids reported in the region. The most recent one that I know of is a hiker in 2012 claimed to see two little hairy ape men about 4 feet tall. They were carrying sticks and slapping them on the water for some odd reason. One site is something shadows. I think something got cut out here amazingly. I thought we fixed this. Anyways, the something shadow site mentions one apparently that was captured in the 1800s that was reported to the Geographical Society. So, but I don't know, for whatever reason, a little piece of it. And I just, this is more newer information to me. So I don't know much about this particular wild man. I've never researched him massively, but he's just another sort of interesting one out there that I find is interesting. Next year, the giant killer snakes. Although silly claims of Titanoboa is the largest, this is not even remotely close. In fact, even in the same region, there was about four other skull-like, sort of like fossil-like things that they found indicating that they would have been bigger than Titanoboa. And this is four different ones found all around the same sort of area. So, I mean, this guy just made this claim, and all these people put across the internet this was the biggest snake that ever lived. Complete BS. I challenge this man. I mean, there's triple, including people, a missionary that I sort of interviewed, right? And all kinds of stuff are telling you that there's 100-foot plus snakes in these sort of regions. Not only in Africa, in South America, but even in North America, there's been many old accounts. I cover actually hundreds of them of different lakes, and a lot of them are now seemingly extinct, these giant snakes. But there was some that was like Titanic sort of size, right? So I mean, this is just a guy wanting to get himself a paper to claim that he found the biggest snake in the world. But everybody from Percy Fawcett to all kinds of ones are talking about snakes double, triple the size that makes Titanoboa look like a punk. So you couldn't find a less fan of Titanoboa than me. I think it's complete BS. This guy just wanted to get himself into a paper, and he makes me, these guys, when they make these claims, they make me sick. They agitate me, actually, because they have no basis of what they're saying. They actually, they're ignoring literally thousands of reports for centuries here of giant snakes in these jungles. And even this monster here isn't much smaller than this so-called Titanoboa. This dude was like 30-some feet long, and I forget what it was, 33 or 30-some feet on it. Right, and you actually see these giant chains wrapped around him on another sort of a one. There was the early reports from there was early reports sort of found from what's his name there, Percy Fawcett. He had killed a python amazingly that he'd measured. I think it was like 63 or that might be a misprint. It might be 63 or 68 feet, one of the two, right? And I mean, this guy measured it meticulously. He was well known to be very factual in his things. And I mean, he also claimed that he saw a Diprotodon there, and he found its footprints and this sort of thing like that. So this guy was a very well meticulous sort of thing, and pretty well almost any of the things he reported you can prove. So I just don't see why to doubt this sort of man, especially in those times. Way less people, way less stuff, way more food for the monster, and maybe they lived longer or whatever with the conditions of the time, right? And these sort of things. Like the Roman Regulus in Africa, he killed a giant snake over 100 feet long and brought it to the Roman Senate. One of his men was eaten by the beast, and he got mad and ordered his men to blast him with catapults. And I mean, this guy has this huge thing about it, and actually brings it sort of to the sort of the Senate, and it was measured in the whole sort of thing. Like it's actually really well sort of right in their Roman records. I don't see why they would make this up or what possible reason, right? Here's one of the missionary reported seeing a giant black snake so huge its body was fully across the river, and measurements show after that it would have been at least about 110 feet long, matching the Carthage Roman monster. So exactly in the same sort of realm like that, these natives around there sort of it's always like he's this giant black sort of snake. He's got big phosphorescent glowing sort of eyes. He's extremely rarely seen, and they're absolutely petrified of him and this sort of thing like that, right? So just another sort of one out there. But I cover all kinds of giant snakes in this sort of book. There was another guy, a helicopter pilot over in Africa, and he's got an excellent photo. I couldn't find it, but I wanted to put it in here. But anyways, he was up in his helicopter, and the crazy thing actually flew up at his helicopter and tried to take a swing at him. And I mean, you can clearly see in the terrain, the guy's way up in the air, the thing's covering this titanic road, and you can see the trees around it. So the estimates of this thing was at least like between 40 to 50 some feet, a sort of range, right fitting in with your so-called biggest one, Titanoboa, right? So again, you know, they're just, so anyways, I will always, I can't wait till somebody actually proves that there's one bigger than this, just to get this guy so he goes away, right? Because I find all these guys that make these statements from now that we had Antarctic dinosaurs that lived in the ice and frozen stuff. Now they got this 2 hour ridiculous documentary when none of this occurred whatsoever. There was no dinosaurs in the frozen Arctic sort of thing or anything. Simply, the frozen Arctic was very warm thousands of years ago. The Earth cracked and pushed these sorts of things to different pole-like areas where it gets colder or warmer. And this is a bunch of them probably went extinct fast once it started getting into this colder sort of thing. Just like in Canada, there was ferns here and all kinds of warm things not massively long ago. They might claim millions of years ago, but probably it's thousands of years ago, right? So this the thing is that we had a giant upheaval here of some kind of giant sort of thing, and that of course a lot of animals would be dying out from these sorts of things, and of course you would find them in all kinds of layers, from earthquakes to floods hitting, oh yeah, trees flipping around, 5 million things. You would believe that some of them are way down deeper, but maybe they were just not even much any older than other ones were, but they were just topsy-turvied over by 3 tons of dirt in a cavern and stuff as the earth is shaking all over the place or whatever, right? This is probably what's more likely sort of occurred, but I guarantee you, anyways, from literally thousands of historic records all across the sort of world, from everywhere from sort of Africa, South America, and even North America, of snakes, by far making Titanoboa just a little mousy minnow. Okay, this guy is again just another sort of so. Anyways, you can believe what you want, but guaranteed that in the past, at least in the last sort of not that massively long ago, there was huge, much bigger snakes than whatever sort of existed sort of in these sorts of like what he claims of this Titanoboa. Here, giant killer snakes, Bob's Lake giant snake and Lake Champlain giant snake was captured in the 1800s. It was 30 feet long. It was reported many times, actually, and a lot of people never correlate this with the Lake Champlain monster, but there was actually numerous sort of articles, and apparently these two guys had claimed that somehow they got it on the shoreline or whatever, and it was like 30-some feet long. There was another one in Lake Superior. I have another sort of one of the same thing, a giant 30-foot some snake, and quite a few of them that I've collected over that shows that, and the colorations of them and things doesn't seem to be pythons or some of the other ones. So they may have been an unknown giant sort of North American snake that may possibly still exist or may have went extinct or whatever, right? And this sort of thing like that. But this giant rat-like snake was said to be killed in northern Ontario, and it was reported to be 32 feet long in the 1930s. It appeared in this early newspaper. As sort of that I've lost the name of this sort of newspaper, but I just have some of the article sort of still up it. But apparently it was it's in sort of northern Ontario, and it's called Penna something or other, not Penetanguishene, but Penna something or other place, I think it's called. And from what I can remember of the sort of article that's missing, but the thing is that it was an early newspaper article, and these guys had actually got this thing, right, and they measured it, and it was like 32 feet long. So I mean that's way bigger than any sort of a North American known snake, and especially back in the 1930s and that sort of things like that. And I cover in this lakes, multi sort of lakes like this with that are unknown to cryptozoology completely. Like you won't find them in any books whatsoever in the universe. Sort of, I did a huge amount of collecting of these giant snake reports since the 1960s, from the Charleston Lake Monster to all kinds of them. Here's one of a lady I interviewed, the giant snake of Bob's Lake, especially in the 1970s. I don't know nowadays. I haven't been around that sort of area for some time and haven't been able to collect any new modern sort of reports. They may still exist. I don't know. But there was a giant black in color snake that was longer than this a famous artist here in the Ottawa region. Her name was Barb, and this giant snake went past her sort of canoe, and it was actually rippled up like it was like coiled up, and it was way bigger than her canoe. So now you have to then stretch him out bigger than the sort of canoe because he was sort of wrapped in these loops, right? And it sort of floated past right past her and stuck his big head up, right, and seemingly sort of was going to attack at her, and so she panicked and sort of bolted, right? Another fellow, George, a marketing agent, later 70s, saw a giant black snake on Bob's Lake that was bigger than his 14-foot aluminum boat. Many more sightings are included in the sort of book and things like that of just that one sort of place, but let alone other sorts of all kinds of them, right? So, but interesting out there that there's these sort of fascinating sort of accounts that are very interesting, right? And I mean, so, but bottom line, no matter what anybody claims, I guarantee you that there is and was bigger snakes than Titanoboa, but for sure. I mean, you can't discount like literally thousands of stories from North America to all over the world here of snakes that are so big where the guy actually had a ability to measure it somewhat or do things. There's just too many. I mean, it's not feasible that they all sort of imagined it that much because I mean, when you get a 15-foot snake, I can see that it could be 25 feet, right? But a 15-foot snake isn't going to reach 100 feet. So when you get to the 100-foot mark, no matter what, likely, even if they were double exaggerating, for sure, then likely, more likely, that most people can get half of a distance incorrectly, like correctly sort of thing of something. Even the worst of witnesses might, at least you would be talking 50 some feet, right? If they actually were telling the truth and really saw this sort of thing. And here's one like way in the 30s some foot, right? I actually grabbed at the time, it was the biggest snake in captivity. It was like 20 some feet long, and I petted the thing. I'm a person who actually held one of the biggest snakes in the ever been sort of recorded out there in captivity, sort of thing. But this dude was even bigger, right? And this sort of thing. And there's way bigger, like I said, because you can't catch something. It's very, very difficult. These guys happen to have all the right stuff with them. It was a gang of them. They were blowing up things around the area, and they probably scared the snake somehow and got him to come out or whatever, right? So yeah, but I mean this sort of thing. So no, like I said, there's ones double plus this size quite often still reported in some areas of the Amazon in Africa and a few other locales worldwide, sort of thing like that. So for sure, whatever there is, snakes at least that can fit the Titanoboa size or bigger. And so I'll stick by this to the ends of the earth, and so any guy that wants to keep claiming Titanoboa was the biggest is just, it's not true, absolutely not. So, but anyway, the windfish of Sudbury. Here's a rare sightings of a mystery fish I investigated of a small transparent minnow species being witnessed mostly by natives of the region. It's said to be almost see-through and 2 to 4 inches in length, and it seems to be found in small schools and tiny that slides through their typical nets. The last sighting I know of was in 2004 by a native who was fishing on a small unnamed lake about 75 miles from Sudbury. This lake apparently has brook trout in it and pike in it. He saw these minnow-like fish in a group, and they were suspended out in the sort of middle of the lake. And this is other reports that I've collected. I cover some more in there, sort of thing like that. And these windfish apparently suspend over deep water. They're almost like you can barely see them. There you can almost like see through them, and there is transparent sort of fish species out there that are almost transparent that you can see through. So it's very feasible that this thing actually exists, right? So here's what he looks like from the native's description. He's a small little minnow-like guy, right? But except you can sort of almost like see through him. Dark couldn't sort of make this sort of this way, so I couldn't find anything to portray this the best, but this is from what the guy's description of what it looked like, sort of like this. and they're anywhere from 2 to 4 inches sort of long, somewhere in this sort of range. That's what he thought they look like, and from a few other accounts, it seems to be in this sort of range. They're not very big, anyways, right? So, but they seem to live in isolated, yeah, uncommon sort of lakes of the Sudbury sort of region, and northern Ontario. There could be other places. I've only found about 4 where they claim they see these sort of things. But anyways, that's it's just another sort of interesting one out there. So very sort of a cool sort of unusual sort of a little cryptid. I'm very sure, like, I mean, if you had the proper sort of netting and stuff, and some decent depth fighters, and start looking for schools, like, I mean, even if they're transparent, I don't imagine they'd be invisible to sort of to even an old flasher. I started using flashers in the late '60s, an old red box. My first sort of one, I was a tiny little kid. This guy at a garage sale, he didn't even have this thing for a year. He had some old red box that was just almost brand new. The guy had used it twice. He didn't know how to use it. And I said, "Sir, I really want one of those." And all, yeah, like this. And the guy actually sold it to me for $5. He felt sorry for me. So I got a brand new sort of a depth fighter. I started using this in ice fishing contests at 4 years of age. so I mean, this is sort of like, so I've been using a long sort of time. Now the new ones there's new, like I used to teach sort of how to use the first early LCD ones at seminars and sports like shows and things like that, and flipping and these kinds of things. I would show them some of these early sort of techniques and things like that. But nowadays, these modern, super modern ones, I haven't used any of these newest models of today, and some of them are mind-boggling. I mean, they're even way better. I wish I'd have been able to use some of them back in the sort of a day. Now you can plot your course right back to the exact same location and all kinds of things, right? So some of them are mind-bogglingly even much better. So certainly with the good, decent equipment that you have nowadays, I'm sure if somebody wanted to take different weekends going up to these remote sort of lakes around there, and sort of looking out for suspended bait fish and seeing if you could sort of even catch some on little small minnow hooks. It's very easy. I've gotten like dozens of species of different kinds of minnows on microscopic little hooks, and a little tiny microscopic piece of dough, or a little microscopic piece of worm, any kind of thing like that. Those sort of attack, and or even microscopic ice flies and things like that. And it's quite feasible that you could probably nail into one of these sort of dudes and prove this sort of this fish actually exists, right? So whatever he is, fascinating. They're not very big, and certainly in low supply, and they're just so sort of thinnish and sort of weird that they're people are missing them. That's all. But I mean, occasionally somebody sees ones, right? So yeah, another interesting one out there. Hey, here, living dino lake monster. Here's a early one here that I collected from South Dakota. There, this farmer reported these giant four-legged reptile attacked his tractor, and he was pushing it off the road before vanishing into Campbell Lake. Investigators later found huge tracks on the shore. Previous to this sighting, sheep and other small animals had been disappearing mysteriously around the area. Other reports I cover in the book of this Campbell Lake beast that may be extinct now. But it was interesting there for a while. There was some kind of monitor like Komodo like dragon like monster that was floating around there. I haven't seen any sort of modern reports or whatever, but these are the kinds of things that I cover in the sort of book of all kinds of different sort of lakes out there that were maybe extinct now, lake monsters and things like that, but they're still very interesting. I still notice the odd sort of one that it didn't sort of but it's certainly an improvement. It's better than sort of some of the other ones here that we've gotten in the past and that sort of thing like that. So yeah, it's very interesting, and sort of ones like that. And the thing is that these sort of also these giant monitor lizards have been also seen like in Florida, sort of other states there, Texas, Georgia, all kinds of ones, and in sort of lakes like this where there's these kinds of sort of early sort of ones there where they're all similar like this, where they're walking on four legs. They look like some kind of huge monitor lizard of some sort, and this sort of thing. So, it's interesting. My suspect is that the since the and I believe this about even some of our Bigfoot things. I have records from 1800s of people going from ships that would trade, and they were known to trade even like orangutans and different sorts of ones, and all kinds of people in the 1800s and early 1900s and different eras had wild zoos. And these zoos, a lot of them went bankrupt, or these circuses and things like that, or when they'd escape, they didn't report it ever, because then they would be responsible for any damage that the gorilla monster might do, or any of these sorts of things. And I highly suspect that a lot of these sorts of ones, from giant monitor lizards to huge snakes to other things, might have been actually early introduced sorts of ones from escaped circuses as well, and from these sorts of zoos and things like that. There's absolutely, literally, there was massive hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of circuses and zoos that have existed in the North American continent for several hundred plus years, sort of thing. And even some of these might have been from ages ago when these traders would come in. If some rich guy's at the port, like let's say in Chicago or something like this, and and this guy comes in and he's got some unusual ape species or giant lizard, and maybe some of these are extinct. Some of the reports that they would say were very strange ape-like creatures that were more Bigfootish-like. There's even reports of orang pandek-like things being brought up across here, and other sorts of weird ones over the sort of ages that would be feasible that some of these were actually also responsible for some of these sightings, right? So, like I said, it's a very strange mixture of possible weird introduced species that got in through some kind of trade or weird things like that, real native ones that were on the brink of extinction, that were unknown ones that by the time the zoologists got to cover all of North America well, some of these were already killed out by early natives, or some kind of thing, or early people settling and this sort of, they clear out the area and things like this. And none of these things are impossible. Like I said, there was three giant sort of big lizards that was discovered on a highway in California not that long ago. Three different species, all on a airplane sort of runway in California. Come on, I mean seriously, you can't even find 3-foot lizards running around, and they're right in the airport running around, and it's an open space, and not until very recent years that you were able to find this. So I mean, if any of these things is very feasible, these creatures do have ability to hide from us. They can poof, like I said, my duck nest monster. To these sorts of things. The guy can appear seemingly out of nowhere and be gone, and that's the end of the sighting, and is never seen again. Like I said, if I didn't have the duck nest monster on film, if I told everybody that I saw a giant, monster duck walking around, nobody would believe that, right? But I mean, nevertheless, he's real, right? That isn't a CGI thing. I'm pretty sure you can tell that. I wouldn't even know how to do a CGI thing, even though I have a computer sort of a degree in sort of my MS engineer. I know how to fix computers, but I'm not a video wizard or any of these sorts of things. I don't know anything about this. I'm trying to learn as I go along to improve these sort of shows and things like that. But I mean, it's very difficult. Sort of the stuff I'm using is. the older computers I'm using and things like that, they take 1,000 years to do a normal presentation. It takes like sometimes a day for it to thing. Whilst this way, I can get this done in a zillion times quicker by doing it as sort of a tablet-like method, right? So, but sadly, it has these weird compression sort of issues and things like that. So, anyways, this has been a sort of a shorter show here, sort of thing like that, and certainly short compared to most of what I usually do. But I just wanted to cover some different ones, and I'm going to sort of next time there. I'm still looking for the world premiere of the Muskrat Lake Monsters there that was filmed and these sort of things. So you'll really enjoy that. It hasn't been seen in many, many moons by anybody out there. It was investigated by 5 scientists, and they all argued what it could be, anything from a seal to some unknown giant beaver. Right. So, but whatever the case, right? It was investigated and fully sort of not a CGI thing. In fact, the original film, I still have it sort of here, was filmed on a super old video camera from the 19 sort of 50s or 60s sort of thing. So that's how old this thing was. It was brought along for a joke and not even meant to film a moss or anything. Just we were going to use it filming fishing this tournament that they had there, by the way, which I won. But anyways, it was filmed out there. I brought this sort of thing along and sort of thing like that. And this is was just going to film this sort of thing, and really, yeah, never expected to see any monster or any of these kinds of things. And lo and behold, yeah, a couple of these things show up, right? So, but anyways, so I have the originals here, sort of, and we had gotten it put on a sort of a video cassette, sort of transferred over to that. So I have that one, and we'll get that out there eventually. Somebody must have a VCR that I know somewhere, and then we'll get it out and that sort of thing like that. But just another sort of thing out there, and we're going to cover all kinds of things. And like I said in the books, there we cover a titanic amount of ones and much more in depth. I just sort of do a little bit of these things. I don't go into mass detail about a lot of them. It's just to make you aware of how many fascinating sort of creatures are out there that, and the cryptozoological world is way, way bigger than any person could possibly imagine. And every time you think you've heard of every cryptid out there, there's, another 200 to sort of join the list, right? Sort of thing like that. So in future shows there, I'm going to try and do sort of a bit of mixture hodgepodge and do some also updated sort of like any new discoveries out there or these kinds of things like that. So next show, like I said, the giant muskrat lake monster, sort of the famous film. Giant snakes in the lake, some more some more little Bigfoot-like sort of things there. And so, if you have any sightings, you can contact direct at the cryptozoology sightings at protonmail.com or the website that I've listed. For some reason, this slide keeps removing sort of this sort of thing. So. But anyways, at least they're fixed up way better than what they typically were. I'm hoping to goodness this time what seems to be the problem is that this thing films, when I do these, it films a large section of it, and to crop it down, when you crop it down, it seems to then cause some kind of compression issue. So I can't find seemingly a proper program that can crop these things to cut out this extra junk around it that it doesn't need to have. Because whatever the reason, it does something here. It causes a problem, right? So anyways, hopefully you enjoyed these unusual sort of ones here, and stay tuned for next show. And I hope you have a great day. And thanks for watching.